Hello everyone, this is Madmandoc for the third in my series of Gemp SWCCG games with commentary. This time we'll be playing Premiere A New Hope. It is a constructive format, not sealed. It's a very, very different game from classic format, as I'm sure you're aware. Most notably, the start of the game will involve only placing an initial starting location. There'll be no reliable mechanism to obtain your locations. You'll just have to draw them. This leaves you vulnerable to getting force choked, which was a recurrent problem in Star Wars CCG really up until Jabba's Palace, and even a little later for the light side. And you'll actually see that happen to me to some degree in this game, and I'll try and manage it as best I can. It could be frustrating at times when that happened to you. Sometimes your deck just did not get the card draws it needed, and it just would not work. And it could happen at any time, almost regardless of the number of locations you played. But we'll just try and make the best of it when it happens. And here we go with the game. Okay. As you can see, I'm on the screen to select my starting location. And I'm going to select the Massassi War Room. It's a little bit of a toss-up between the War Room and Obi-Wan's hut. Obviously, Obi-Wan's hut gives you the great game text of deploying Obi-Wan cheaply, but it's a huge liability. The dark side is going to immediately target that site, and since they're quite likely to be playing one of many, or quite a few of the strong Tatooine dark side sites, they're going to be able to access it fairly readily. The Massassi War Room, they'll typically need a presence of the Force or a spy to get to, and the drain is one less, so it's not such a severe loss if they do get an early invasion. Now, I expect most dark side players will be playing presence of the Force and or spies, so it's still a risk, but it's the best you've got, so we'll go with that. The opponent starts with the Death Star. That's quite common in Premiere A New Hope. It's by far the best starting location. Simply being a 3-0 makes it good enough, even if it didn't have game decks, but it's immune to revolution, which is even better. It is a bit of a liability. It's actually a really big liability, and to some degree in Premiere A New Hope, the light side would be wise to target the Death Star for drain and go after it as quickly as they can. Many light side decks are designed with that in mind, as is mine. The thing is that not only do you get the potential drain of 3, but the dark side is going to have to dump a large amount of resources, possibly including expensive Star Destroyers, into defending the Death Star. And even if they succeed, they then can't drain you there. So, it's basically a win-win for you. Okay, so looking at my starting hand, I did get a Tantive 4, also a Wedge. So my early strategy is completely clear. I'm going to try and get that Tantive 4 to the Death Star as soon as I can. Now, on the negative side, I didn't get any locations, and that's actually a pretty big problem. As you could see, I had quite a few locations in the deck, and by not drawing any in my opening hand, I'm going to be suffering for a very long time unless I were to get a very lucky draw with a couple of good generation locations. But we'll just have to suffer through that. We'll hope the dark side gives us a few fours. Sometimes they do, and we'll proceed from there. Okay. So on my first turn, there's not really anything I can do. I have a hand that gives me plenty of options, so I'm simply not going to do anything other than leave the Force. That cycled through pretty quickly. As you could see, the opponent did the same thing, I think. They simply left their Force. And then on my second turn, I deployed Tantive 4. He activates and he's up to 7. And he plays Presence of Force and Darth Vader over to the Massassi War Room. Now, that's bad for me. Vader is very difficult to deal with in this format, and he's going to get a healthy drain of 3. But as you can see, I also have a drain of 3, so the game's basically just equalized right now. The real problem is that he's out activating me by a considerable margin. It may look like it's only 2 force, but on a percentage basis it's pretty enormous. And that's going to be a problem that really just gets worse and worse for me unless I get into some locations. Okay, so I make a drain and I deploy Wedge aboard the TANF-4 to get myself a battle destiny there. Draw a couple cards, and it's his turn. He drains me at the war room, and I lose 3 off the top of my reserve deck. Now, I'm a big fan of losing cards off the top of your reserve deck. When I first started playing, and even for quite a while after that, and maybe even still now, I kept hearing over and over again that you should not lose cards from your reserve deck because it's uncontrolled. You don't know what it'll be. Maybe it'll be something important. Maybe you'll wish you hadn't lost it. You should lose from your hand. That way you know what you're losing. And I have always felt that was extremely bad advice, especially in these early set formats where the generation is limited, because to get a card in your hand, you are essentially spending 1 force because you draw that card from your force pile. So a card lost from your hand not only cost you that card, but it also meant that you used an active force to draw and then accomplish nothing with that card draw. So in a sense, it's also costing you 1 force of activation. Now I agree that you can't control the card loss, but I think that that's not nearly as big of a problem as the efficiency loss from losing from your hand. So I happily lose from reserve, and I like it when my opponents lose from their hand. Now he deploys Tarkin, which is obviously the strongest available dark side combo in Premiere and New Hope. That means that it's going to be a long time before I can do anything about that drain of 3, and it could be that I never do anything about it. On the other hand, at least I can account for Vader and Tarkin. If they're there at the war room, then they can't turn up somewhere else to beat me down. So continuing on, I'm still activating 4, which is very bad for me, but at least I do have this Death Star drain. So I'm holding the game together a little bit using that. Now I'm drawing cards here, trying desperately to get a location. And I do not get a location. I draw so many cards that he uses a Madmandoc on me to try and reduce my hand size. And I have really no option other than to try and sense it with Wedge. Knowing that's not too likely to succeed, but if I don't sense it with Wedge, the sense I was going to use might well just get put back into my use pile anyway, so it's worth a shot, and miraculously I hit it. That helped me quite a bit in this game, getting lucky on that draw, as a significant chunk of my hand going back into used would be a big loss of tempo. I have drawn up cards here, and I've still got no locations. As you can see, I have 42 cards in my cycling force, and I have still not drawn a single location. That means I've seen 18 cards with no location. Well, 17 if you don't count my starting location. So that's not good for me. That's bad luck, and it is hurting me in the game quite a bit. But he's not drawing much in the way of generation either. If he had 2 more locations out, I would probably be in for an unrecoverable game. Okay. And we continue. I get drained again, go right off the reserve using the same rationale as I mentioned before. I did lose Obi-Wan's lightsaber, which is not a good loss, as I'm going to need that if I have any hope to accomplish anything on the ground at any point in this game. Still activating up only 4 force, but I do have this healthy drain with a pretty strong ship. And luckily, I drew into both Obi-Wan's lightsaber and the throne room. It's not a lot of activation, but one more would help quite a bit. He uses that turn to draw up. Now at this point, I make a mistake. I play a used Grimtosh. I am looking at my hand and I have 1 sense and 1 altar, and I don't have anyone on the board who can provide high ability to make the sense highly reliable. He has 14 cards in hand, and I should have suspected that he would be able to counter my card, given that I only have 1 sense and 1 altar. When I was playing this game, I actually thought I had another sense in my hand for some reason. Maybe even that wouldn't have been enough to make it a reasonable play, but I decided to play this interrupt, and of course Vader sensed it, and I altered the sense, and he sensed the altar, and I tried to sense off of Wedge, which probably would have missed anyway, and that got countered with another altar. So I lost the Grimtosh and both the sense and the altar, which was entirely my fault. Should not have tried to play that at that moment. It was not a good time. Do get the drain in. And take 3 more loss from the drain that I can't stop at the war room. Now at this point he deploys DS614 in black 4. Now he doesn't attack. That makes sense. He has very low forfeit from DS614, and maybe he doesn't want to just trade DS614 for Wedge, or possibly have me draw high and get the TIE Fighter 2. It also worried me here because I thought that a play like this suggested he might have Lone Pilot, and Lone Pilot could get past Wedge's forfeit, and that would be a problem. Although now I think about it, it might say, if not able to otherwise, for piloting with DS614 on black 4, so maybe he only would have got 1 battle destiny. So you can see I'm not very expert in this early format. I make some mistakes, more so than I typically make in Classic. Okay, so my deploy phase, I do get out this jungle, and I deploy Biggs onto the Tantive 4 to provide some much needed forfeit. I initiate a battle here with a good power margin, and he has 6 battle damage. He decides to lose the pilot, which he's required to, and also the TIE Fighter to satisfy the battle damage. And I'm back to controlling the Death Star. Draw a couple more cards, and I get very good card draws. I got Han Solo and Obi-Wan's hut, which are probably the 2 best cards I could have drawn right there. Now he is able to deploy a Victory class Star Destroyer with Chief Bast and Officer Evacs, but that uses up all of his available force, and he cannot initiate a battle. This is important because this would be a good place for him to initiate a battle on me, but he doesn't have the force to do it, and so he's forced to just sit there, and gives me a chance to reinforce at this very critical location. Now, he is down to 3 cards in his hand. That was a consequence of using up all of his force to deploy an expensive Star Destroyer and 2 pilots. I have 16 cards in my hand, including, looks like, 1 sense and 1 altar. That means that I can control the interrupts at this point. That is an important thing in the early sets, especially in Premiere and Premiere A New Hope. Sense and altar are so strong, and the side that can control Sense and altar wars essentially has the ability to use its interrupts and effects, and the other side doesn't, and that's a very decisive advantage in the early going. It puts a real premium on drawing a large hand, And as you can see, I have a very large hand, and he has only 3 cards in hand. So that's something that's gone into my favor a little bit here. Okay, I'm able to deploy Obi-Wan's hut, cheaply deploy Obi-Wan there with the saber and the lightsaber proficiency. And that gets me a drain of 2. Remember that in the early sets, force drains at non-battleground locations were both effective and common, and without any good counters most of the time, so we'll go ahead and use that. Now, I made an attack at the Death Star after deploying the Mantilian Savret, thinking that I could always just forfeit out of my hand if needed. But I got a Destiny draw of 5, and he got a 1, which caused me to win the battle. Hence, I had to lose Wedge, and that's not really a good thing for me. It would have been better to lose that battle and just attrition one of his guys. But that's where we are, and I'm hoping that of his 3 cards, he does not have a pilot to reinforce that Victory-class Star Destroyer. Continuing to take hard losses there at the War Room Drain, including the loss of 1 Luke Skywalker. Now, I have 3 Luke Skywalkers in this deck. I've not run across any of them. But if I'm going to have a chance to do anything about Vader and Tarkin draining, I'm going to need Luke before I can do anything about it. He allows me to play Destiny Adders, especially the Force is strong with this one, and Gift of the Mentor, and I'm not going to be able to make any traction against Vader Tarkin without those cards. Okay. Meanwhile, here at the Death does put Dr. Abazan on, which boosts his power up to 10 plus a Battle Destiny. And of course, he attacks. Draws a 3. Gives me 8 battle damage, but the Savrip plus a spare Obi-Wan takes care of all that. Savrip is an extremely strong card in this early set. And get my drains in there at Obi-Wan's hut, which keeps me hanging in competitively a little bit. And Han goes over here to Tantive 4. I decide not to attack because I'm hoping to draw Luke and use this Don't Get Cocky together with Han. I don't want to lose Han somehow before that happens. And luckily I did draw Luke. He's still running low of cards in his hand, so he takes the opportunity to draw several. I activate a solid 8 force, finally having gotten several locations out. And now I get the chance to deploy Luke and onto the Tantive 4. I do this mainly because I have Don't Get Cocky in my hand, and it's a good chance to put some serious damage onto that ship. He then makes basically the same play that I made before, which is trying to use Sensor Alter with a very small hand. I think that his play is better than mine was because he's trying to cancel Don't Get Cocky, which is a much more critical play than when I was trying to cancel Monarch. But as expected, with such a small hand, he turns up a little short in the Sense Alter war, and I'm able to get this interrupt through. I draw a 5, a 4, and a 2 with Grimtosh. I'm obviously very happy with those Destiny draws. I do not attempt to redraw the 2, as I'm totally happy with that. It's enough to take out the ship. Now I decide to forfeit Luke, because I know I have another Luke in the deck somewhere, and if Luke is not on that ship, he may be back on the ground. And luckily, there he is, back in my hand. I'm able to alter Presence of the Force, which puts a little dent in his activation and also reduces his drain. But he counters back with 2 very strong plays, Vader's lightsaber and a Dark Jedi lightsaber on Tarkin. I was not happy to see that. Now he's got a drain of 4 going at the war room. Furthermore, he's got Maya there as well. And it really looks like there's not much I'm going to be able to do to stop that. Okay, so on the next turn, I'm able to get in a healthy drain of 3 at the Death Star, as well as 2 more at Obi-Wan's hut. And looking at my hand, I realize that I have an interesting opportunity here. I do have a neighbor leads. I have a sorry about the mess. And I also have high destinies around in my reserve deck. I just drew those high destinies in the battle against the Star Destroyer. And I can remember that they're basically right on top of where my reserve is right now. So I'm able to take a shot at a neighbor leads, knowing that I can make a swing at Tarkin and probably hit him. So I go with Nabrin, and I'm lucky, and it only costs me 1. And then I fire off the sorry about the mess, which I use to target Tarkin, hitting the 5 and a 4. So he's down. Now, I had to decide whether I wanted to battle right there, but I decided not to because I only have 1 card left in my reserve, which means that if I battle, I cannot lightsaber and then draw Battle Destiny. So I wait. I also happen to have Warrior's Courage, which gives me an extra Battle Destiny should he attack. And when I drew, I picked up Great Dragon Howl, which will give me another. On his turn, he initiates a battle here at the War Room, using the War Room text to add a Battle Destiny. This doesn't bother me too much because I have Mentilian Savrip and I have a couple ships that are probably not going to be needed to sacrifice for the forfeit value almost no matter how high he's able to get. I'm going to be able to handle that. Now an interesting thing happens. I use Obi-Wan's text to move Mayo, and he decides to go ahead and move him rather than losing him. A whole bunch of interrupts go off. I do sense 1 Destiny Adder. And I play my Warrior's Courage as well as my Great Dragon Howl. I get lucky in that he does not hit Obi-Wan, which means that as long as I don't win this battle, I'm going to be able to use the Savrip to hold off all the attrition and keep Obi-Wan at the location. He draws his destinies, and I draw mine. And that works out reasonably well for me. I do lose the battle, actually by quite a bit, but not so much that it's a problem. I would rather have kept the gold leader, but it's okay to let it go. It's not too likely he'll be able to do anything about the Tantive from here on in. And now he has the problem of a Mayo that's just sitting there waiting to get beaten. And unfortunately for him, I have the perfect card to put the hurt on Mayo, and that's Chewbacca. I hit a really good Destiny draw, which results in 10 battle damage. And at this point, he's facing 5 force loss, as well as having no board presence, and facing a drain of 5 per turn and only 1 card in his hand. So that means that he's not going to be able to recover. He recognizes that, and he decides to concede, which I think was a reasonable decision at this point. So looking back at this game, in the early going, I think it's fair to say that I didn't like my position very much. When I was struggling to generate force, and Vader was in on the war room, I thought I might be headed for a long game. But I was able to hang in there. The persistent attack on the Death Star diverted a lot of his resources, and while he was able to hold off drains for several turns, he ended up depleting his hand because he spent force on ships rather than drawing it into his hand. And that's what led to me ultimately being able to make a counterattack at the war room, even against what looked like insurmountable odds. He went several turns with only a few cards in his hand, and that made him unable to respond to things that I was trying to do. And hence I was luckily able to get Obi-Wan over there, hit with that sorry about the mess, and eliminate Vader. Once that happens late in the game, he may find that it's going to be a lost game. In this case, the fact that Mayo ended up on his own and sustained that tremendous beatdown kind of hurried things along. But even if that hadn't happened to Mayo, just the lack of board presence combined with the small hand size was going to mean that these drains of 5 were going to go through and finish him off. So I was happy that I was able to turn that game around. I should point out to anyone who likes to play the Premiere A New Hope format that you might want to be careful about conceding too early in that format. Unlike later formats, there's just not that many good cards. You can't control the flow of the game as well, and that means that comebacks are much more possible. You can be behind, as I was, and you might be able to turn it around. In the classic format, once you start losing, usually they just keep steamrolling and you start losing worse and worse and worse. And for that reason, early concessions sometimes make sense when it's just gone all wrong for you. But in the early formats, especially if you have a chance to play a Vader, you might still have a chance to come back even when it looks bad. So hang in there. Alright guys, thanks for watching the video, and as always I appreciate it, and hopefully I'll see you on the site at our next game. That's Madmandoc out. Thank you.